Sometimes a person watches a dream for so long that he finally begins to consider it not a dream, but an impossibility. The same thing happened to Sarah. She was waiting for a promise. Years passed, then decades passed, and one day, life reached a point where, by human reckoning, there was no room for hope. It is not written by human reckoning. There was a promise in the lives of Abraham and Sarah. God had promised Abraham about descendants and the future, but time was passing, and the promise had not yet been fulfilled. This waiting breaks a person from the inside, because the trouble is not just that we do not get an answer. The real trouble is that we do not know when the answer will come. A year passed, then another, then many more. Sarah's youth passed. A large part of their lives was spent waiting, and then that age came. When a person does not dream of the future, he looks at the past. He thinks, perhaps it is too late now. When hope and reality stood face to face, three strangers came to Abraham. Abraham welcomed them. Food was prepared. Conversation took place. And then, a piece of news came that changed the whole situation. It was said about Sarah that she would give birth to a son. Apparently, this was not ordinary news, because Sarah was almost 90 years old, and Abraham was almost 100 years old. Here, the story was not just about a child. Here, the question was, does God's promise end with the passage of time? Human logic said, it can't happen now, but God's promise said, it can be now. And this was the moment where human weakness and divine power stood before each other. Sarah was at the door of the tent. She was listening to this from within, and perhaps the entire story of the years came back to her mind in an instant. That waiting, those silent prayers, those passing years, the hope that had once been alive, and then reality. Almost 90 years old. Physically, the hope of children had ended in human terms. Sarah thought to herself, is it possible now at such an age? And then she laughed. It was not just the laughter of joy. It was wonder. It was a human reaction to the unbelievable, because sometimes man does not want to deny God's promise. He just does not understand. How will this happen? Here begins the real lesson of the story. We often think that the greatest enemy in our lives is failure, but sometimes failure is not. Time is our greatest test, because failure comes one day, but waiting, it comes every day, every morning, every night, in every quiet moment, and slowly a voice arises within man. Maybe it was not for me. Maybe my time has passed. Maybe God has forgotten me. The story of Sarah stops us at this point, because her circumstances said, it is too late now. But God's promise was saying, the story is not over yet. Now imagine, an elderly woman, a dream she had almost buried, and then suddenly, the news of that dream comes back to her. The news that was once a hope now seems impossible. Sarah looked back at her past. She looked at her age. She looked at her circumstances and laughed. But God didn't see their circumstances. God saw what was yet to come. That is the hardest part of faith, when the evidence before you says one thing and the promise says another. Then comes the question that becomes the center of this entire story. Is anything too hard for God? This wasn't just a question for Sarah. It's a question for us too. When the door is closed, when time passes, when opportunities seem to be running out, when people say it can't happen anymore. So the question is not, what do my circumstances say? The real question is anything too hard for God? Because man sees possibilities, God sees power. Man sees age, God sees promise. Man sees endings, God can see a new beginning. Sarah's laughter reveals a strange human truth. We don't always believe what we hope for. Sometimes we've been wounded by hope so many times that when hope comes again, it seems impossible to us. But God didn't end Sarah's story at her age. He didn't end it at her weakness. He didn't end it at her doubt. And that's the biggest thing. There may be a chapter in your life too that you thought was over. A dream, a prayer, a purpose, a door that you have decided it will never open again. But remember the story of Sarah, because to God, your current state is not your final state. Sarah was almost 90 years old. In human terms, the wait was over, but in God's terms, the story was still there. And perhaps this is the most important message for you today. Then came the day that Sarah had waited for her whole life, the day that had seemed hard to even think about. A son was born to Sarah, Isaac. A woman who had given up hope years ago stands today holding in her arms the child whose promise had once seemed impossible. Sarah, is this really my son? Perhaps in that moment, Sarah's entire life passed before her eyes. Those years while she waited, those nights when no answer came, that moment when they felt that the promise might never be fulfilled. And then, one day God did what human reason thought was impossible. Sarah saw her child, and perhaps at that moment, there was only one thing in her heart. God made me laugh. That laugh, which had once been a symbol of wonder and the unbelievable, had now become joy. The woman who had once said, the same woman was now sitting with her son in her arms. The impossible had become reality. Waiting had turned into joy. Tears had turned into gratitude, and Sarah's life taught the world a lesson that still lives today. God's promise may be fulfilled late, but late is not always denied. Maybe you are also waiting for something. Perhaps you have thought many times, it's too late now. Nothing can happen now. At that moment, God proved, nothing is impossible for me. And maybe a day will come in your life too, when you will remember all the tears of your past. Then, looking at your present reality, you will say, now I understand. God was silent, not absent. Because sometimes, God seems to be late in answering,